James Chen never planned to attend the charity gala. As a middle manager at Vertex Innovations, he usually skipped these fancy events. The Grand Meridian Hotel ballroom felt too grand, too polished for someone who spent his days buried in supply chain data and spreadsheets. Just make an appearance, his boss had told him. 2 hours tops. The big clients like seeing a full team. So here he was, tugging at his rented tuxedo collar, nursing a glass of sparkling water in a corner. The hotel ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, wealthy investors and executives who probably earned in a month what James made in a year. He checked his watch. 1 hour down, 1 to go, first time at one of these? James turned to find Lily from marketing standing beside him. Unlike James, she seemed completely at home in the elegant surroundings, her blue dress matching the confidence in her eyes. Is it that obvious? James asked, grateful for a friendly face. You've been checking your watch every 5 minutes, Lily laughed. Don't worry. These things are boring for most of us too. We just hide it better. James smiled. I'm more of a behind-the-scenes person. Spreadsheets don't require small talk. Well, the food's good at least. Have you tried those little shrimp things? Before James could answer, a commotion near the center of the room caught their attention. The crowd was parting like the sea, making way for a man whose mere presence seemed to change the energy of the room. Victor Harrington, Lily whispered, the big boss himself. James had never met the founder and owner of Vertex Innovations in person. Few people below the executive level ever did. Victor Harrington was more legend than man around the office. Brilliant, unpredictable, impossible to please. At 62, he had built Vertex from nothing into a technology empire. His silver hair and expensive suit projected power, but it was his eyes that people noticed first. Sharp, observant, missing nothing. He rarely shows up to these things anymore, Lily continued. Something must be up. James watched as executives flocked to Victor, each trying to claim a moment of his time. The billionaire's responses were brief, his attention constantly moving. He looked bored. Poor guy, James said without thinking. Lily nearly choked on her drink. Poor, he's worth billions. Yeah, but look at him. Everyone wants something from him. Nobody's actually talking to him. Must be lonely. The crowd around Victor continued to grow. The company's top executives circled him. Wei Jiang, the stern CFO. Damon Parker, the slick VP of sales. Rita Lopez, the brilliant chief technology officer. They all wanted Victor's attention, his approval. James was about to suggest to Lily that they find those shrimp appetizers when Victor's voice cut through the polite chatter of the ballroom. Is this really the best evening we can manage, people? The room fell quiet. Victor's voice wasn't particularly loud, but it carried authority that demanded attention. Every year, same conversations, same fake laughs, same boring speeches about quarterly projections. Victor sighed dramatically. I founded this company to create something exciting. When did we all become so predictable? The executives exchanged nervous glances. No one seemed to know how to respond to their founder's sudden mood shift. James felt a twist of secondhand embarrassment watching the scene unfold. Victor's restless gaze swept across the room until it landed on something in the corner. His expression changed instantly. Now that's interesting, he said, striding across the ballroom toward a grand piano that had been set up for the evening's background music. The pianist had taken a break, leaving the magnificent instrument temporarily unattended. Victor ran his fingers lightly over the polished black surface. Steinway Model D, beautiful instrument. The crowd watched, uncertain where this was going. Victor Harrington's spontaneous moments were legendary, and sometimes led to major company announcements or public firings. You know, Victor continued, turning to face the crowd, I've always believed that true leadership requires more than just business skills. It requires soul, creativity, the courage to perform when everything is on the line. He tapped the piano thoughtfully. My father forced me to take piano lessons for 10 years. I hated every minute of it, he chuckled. But he was right. Music teaches discipline, precision, emotion, everything a good leader needs. The tension in the room was building. James found himself holding his breath, though he wasn't sure why. Victor's face suddenly lit up with that look executives had come to fear, the spark of an impulsive idea. I have a proposition, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. Right here, right now. I'll make whoever can play this piano really play it, not just plink out chopsticks. The next CEO of Vertex Innovations. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. The current CEO, Thomas Reed, who'd been running the company while Victor focused on new ventures, froze with his champagne glass halfway to his lips. Victor. Wei Jiang stepped forward cautiously. Perhaps we should discuss succession planning in a more traditional setting? Victor waved her concern away. Traditional is boring, Wei. You know how I feel about boring. Damon Parker, always quick to position himself, laughed loudly. Well, I took lessons as a kid. I could play a mean for Elise. No, Victor interrupted. I mean really play. Something challenging. How about... He thought for a moment. Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu. The room fell silent. Fantaisie Impromptu was notoriously difficult, with its contrasting rhythms and technical demands. Anyone? Victor looked around expectantly. His expression said he already knew the answer. The executive shuffled uncomfortably. Rita Lopez shook her head. I'm tone deaf, unfortunately. Thomas Reed cleared his throat. Victor, I don't think musical ability should determine... That's exactly your problem, Tom. Victor cut him off. Always thinking inside the box. That's why our innovation pipeline is dried up. James watched the scene unfold from his corner, fascinated by the uncomfortable power dynamics playing out. The billionaire was toying with his executives like a cat with mice. I played clarinet in high school, someone offered weakly. Guitar here, said another. Victor's smile grew. This was exactly what he'd expected. A room full of supposedly brilliant business minds all making excuses. Nobody? Not one person in this entire room can play a piece by Chopin. Victor's disappointment was theatrical, but seemed to contain a grain of genuine frustration. What happened to well-rounded excellence? To Renaissance thinking? To taking risks? James felt something strange stirring inside him as he watched. A memory. A feeling he'd buried years ago. Before he knew what he was doing, before his rational mind could stop him. James heard himself speak, I'll play. His voice wasn't loud, but in the awkward silence it carried. Heads turned. People stepped aside. Suddenly James Chen, the invisible middle manager from supply chain analytics, was visible to everyone, including Victor Harrington. And you are? Victor asked, his eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. James swallowed hard. What was he doing? 5 years at the company, and he'd never spoken directly to the founder. Now he was volunteering to play one of the most challenging piano pieces ever written. James Chen, sir. Supply Chain Analytics Department. Victor looked him over with new interest. Supply chain, really? He glanced at Thomas Reed. Do you know this guy? Reed shrugged slightly, clearly having no idea who James was. Well, Mr. Chen from Supply Chain. Victor's eyes sparkled with amusement. The offer stands. Play Fantaisie Impromptu by Frédéric Chopin. Play it well, and I'll make you the next CEO of Vertex Innovations. A few executives chuckled. Others looked embarrassed for James, this nobody who'd suddenly put himself in the spotlight. Lily touched James's arm. You don't have to do this, she whispered. He's just playing games. But James was already walking toward the piano, his heart pounding in his chest. The crowd parted again, this time for him, though with confusion rather than respect. Victor gestured grandly toward the piano bench. The stage is yours, Mr. Chen. As James approached the magnificent instrument, memories he'd locked away came flooding back. The countless hours of practice. The competitions. The dreams he'd abandoned. What no one in that ballroom knew, what no one at Vertex Innovations could possibly know, was that before his business degree, before the wrist injury that had changed everything, James Chen had been on track to become one of the most promising concert pianists of his generation. He hadn't touched a piano in public for nearly a decade. As he sat down on the bench, feeling the cool ivory keys beneath his fingertips, James wasn't sure if he was about to revive his past or completely destroy his future. The ballroom fell silent as James sat at the piano. He could feel dozens of eyes on him, curious, doubtful, amused. The polished black Steinway waited, its lid propped open like a great black wing. James adjusted the bench slightly, muscle memory from another life taking over. Well, Victor Harrington's voice carried from where he now leaned against a column, arms crossed. We're waiting, Mr. Chen from Supply Chain. A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. In their eyes, James was already a joke. The nobody who'd stepped out of line who'd soon crawl back to his spreadsheets humiliated. James closed his eyes for a moment. His hands hovered above the keys. Could he really do this, after so many years? The piece Victor had chosen, Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu, was brutally difficult. Even when James was practicing 6 hours daily, it had challenged him with its contrasting rhythms and technical demands. He sensed movement nearby and opened his eyes to find Lily standing close to the piano. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. "Just walk away. Everyone will forget about it by Monday." But would he forget? Would he forgive himself for walking away again? James looked up and found Victor watching him intently. The billionaire's expression had changed slightly. Was that a flicker of curiosity beneath the amusement? "I'm waiting to be impressed, Mr. Chen," Victor called out. "Or are you reconsidering?" Wei Chang, the CFO, stepped forward. "Victor, I think we've had enough entertainment for one evening. Perhaps we should move on to the—" "No," James said quietly, finding his voice. "I'll play." Wei raised an eyebrow, then retreated with a small shake of her head. James heard her mutter to someone. "This should be interesting, at least." James took a deep breath. He flexed his fingers, rolling his wrists gently. The right one, the one with the old injury, felt stiff, uncertain. Too many years of typing reports instead of practicing arpeggios. He placed his fingers on the keys. The cool ivory felt both foreign and achingly familiar, like revisiting a childhood home, strange yet known to the deepest part of you. The first notes came tentatively. His fingers remembered their positions, but they felt clumsy, uncertain. A wrong note slipped in, then another. James winced internally. This was exactly what he'd feared. The crowd began to shift uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Another person whispered something that made their companion laugh softly. Damon Parker, the VP of Sales, looked at Victor with a smug smile that said, "See what happens when you give opportunities to the wrong people?" James closed his eyes again, shutting out the room, the stares, the judgment. He focused only on the piano, on the music living inside it, waiting to be released. He thought of his childhood teacher, Mr. Wu, who'd spotted his talent when James was just 7 years old, playing on an old upright piano in his parents' apartment. "Music isn't in the piano, James," Mr. Wu had told him once. "It's in you. The piano is just how you let it out." James took another breath. Then, instead of thinking about the technical challenges of the piece or worrying about mistakes, he simply played. The transformation was immediate. His hands found their old confidence, moving across the keyboard with growing assurance. The opening cascades of notes flowed from his fingers, building in speed and intensity. The famous 4-against-3 polyrhythm, 4 notes in the right hand against 3 in the left, that made this piece so challenging, emerged naturally, as if his hands belonged to 2 different people working in perfect harmony. The middle section arrived, the lyrical, singing heart of the piece. James leaned into the melody, letting it breathe and speak. This was where Chopin's genius truly shone, in creating music that felt like human speech, like a story being told without words. As he played, something was happening in the ballroom. The whispers had stopped. The shuffling had ceased. Every person stood transfixed, watching this unremarkable middle manager transform before their eyes into something remarkable. Victor Harrington had straightened from his casual pose against the column. The amused smile had vanished, replaced by an expression of genuine surprise. He stepped closer to the piano, watching James's hands with growing intensity. The music built toward its conclusion, the opening theme returning with even greater urgency. James's fingers flew across the keys, no longer constrained by years of disuse. His body swayed slightly with the music, completely absorbed in the performance. As the final chords resonated through the ballroom, James kept his eyes closed for a moment longer, not wanting to break the spell, not ready to return to reality. When he finally looked up, he was met with absolute silence. Then Wei Jiang, the stern CFO who never showed emotion, began to clap. Others joined her until the entire ballroom filled with applause. James stood awkwardly, unsure what to do with this unexpected reaction. Victor Harrington remained still, studying James with an unreadable expression. When he finally moved, it was to walk slowly toward the piano. "Mr. Chen," Victor said, his voice quiet but carrying in the now silent room. "That was Unexpected. James nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Where did you learn to play like that? I studied at Juilliard, James said, his voice barely above a whisper. A long time ago, a murmur ran through the crowd. Juilliard, one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Juilliard, Victor repeated thoughtfully. And yet you work in supply chain analytics at my company. It wasn't a question, but James answered anyway. Life takes unexpected turns, sir. Victor nodded slowly, as if processing something significant. Indeed it does. He turned to address the crowd. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it seems we've witnessed something quite extraordinary tonight. Thomas Reed, the current CEO, stepped forward with a nervous laugh. Extraordinary indeed, Victor. Now, about the charity auction. Not yet, Tom. Victor cut him off, his eyes still on James. I believe I made a promise. The room fell silent again. Surely Victor Harrington wasn't seriously considering his impulsive offer. You can't possibly mean, Reed began. I said, Victor's voice hardened, that whoever could play Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu would become the next CEO of Vertex Innovations. Mr. Chen has done exactly that. Victor, be reasonable, Wei Jiang intervened. A company isn't run on musical ability. No, Victor agreed. It's run on talent, discipline, and the courage to step forward when others won't. He turned to James. Qualities Mr. Chen has just demonstrated in abundance. James felt lightheaded. This couldn't be happening. Mr. Harrington, I appreciate the gesture, but I wasn't seriously expecting. Why not? Victor asked sharply. Why shouldn't you expect to be rewarded for exceptional ability? Before James could answer, Damon Parker stepped between them. Victor, this is absurd. Chen has no executive experience, no leadership training. The board would never approve. The board, Victor reminded him coldly, answers to me, not the other way around. I still own 60% of this company. The tension in the room was palpable. James felt caught in a power struggle much bigger than him. Look, James said, I just wanted to play the piano. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Victor laughed, a genuine sound of delight that seemed to surprise even him. That's exactly why you're perfect, Mr. Chen. You didn't step forward to grab power. You stepped forward to create something beautiful. He glanced around the room at his executives. When was the last time any of you did something simply because you could do it brilliantly? The silence that followed was answer enough. Victor, Thomas Reed tried again. You can't make someone CEO because they play piano well. That's not how business works, no? Victor raised an eyebrow. Isn't it exactly how I became CEO? By doing something better than everyone else? He turned back to James. Monday morning, 9 a.m., my office. We'll discuss the details of your transition. With that, Victor Harrington walked away, leaving a stunned ballroom in his wake. The executives immediately huddled together, their faces a mixture of disbelief, anger, and calculation. James stood frozen by the piano, unable to process what had just happened. Lily appeared at his side, her eyes wide. James, she whispered, what just happened? I have no idea, he answered honestly. Did you really study at Juilliard? Why didn't you ever mention it? James stared after Victor's retreating figure. Some dreams hurt too much to talk about. And now? Lily asked. What happens now? Before James could answer, he was surrounded by people who had never noticed him before. Executives who couldn't have picked him out of a lineup that morning were suddenly introducing themselves, offering congratulations, making small talk that thinly veiled their assessment of this potential new reality. Over their shoulders, James caught sight of Thomas Reed watching him, the CEO's face a mask of barely controlled fury. Wei Dong was already on her phone, likely calling board members. Damon Parker was charming as ever, but his eyes were cold as he shook James's hand. Congratulations, Parker said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Quite the performance. James wasn't sure if he meant the piano or the sudden rise from obscurity. Thank you, James replied simply. As the crowd around him grew, one thought kept repeating in James's mind, what have I done? James barely slept that night. He lay awake in his small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the evening over and over. Had it really happened? Had Victor Harrington, one of the richest men in the country, really offered him the CEO position because of a piano performance? It felt like a dream, or maybe a nightmare, considering the looks on the executives' faces. By morning, James had convinced himself it was all an elaborate joke. Victor was known for his eccentric sense of humor. Surely by Monday there would be a company-wide email laughing off the whole incident. James would go back to his cubicle, back to his spreadsheets, back to invisibility. Yet when his phone rang at 7 a.m. Sunday morning, the caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Hello?" James answered groggily. "Mr. Chen? This is Patricia, Mr. Harrington's personal assistant." The woman's voice was crisp, professional. "I'm calling to confirm your meeting with Mr. Harrington tomorrow at 9 a.m. James sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "That's still happening?" "Of course." Patricia sounded surprised he would even ask. "Mr. Harrington has also requested that you arrive through the executive entrance. Security will be expecting you." After hanging up, James sat motionless on the edge of his bed. This was real. Whatever was happening, it wasn't a joke. His phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Have you seen your email?" He hadn't. Opening his work email, James found his inbox flooded. Dozens of messages from colleagues he'd barely spoken to before, all suddenly wanting to connect. Several from board members requesting private meetings, one from HR about transition procedures, and most surprisingly, a message from Victor Harrington himself, sent at 3:24 a.m. "Mr. Chen, your performance last night revealed something I've been searching for in my company for years. True excellence hides in unexpected places. We have much to discuss. Until tomorrow." VH James set his phone down, his hands shaking slightly. What did he know about being a CEO? About leading a company with thousands of employees? About answering to shareholders? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He'd studied business, yes, but he'd spent the past 5 years analyzing supply chain efficiency metrics, not making executive decisions. His biggest leadership experience was heading a team of 3 junior analysts. The thought of walking into the executive suite tomorrow made his stomach twist. They would all see through him immediately. This wasn't his world. He didn't belong there. James's eyes fell on the small box tucked away on his bookshelf. He hadn't opened it in years, but now something pulled him toward it. Inside lay the physical remnants of his former life. Competition medals, concert programs, and the brace he'd worn after the accident. He picked up a faded photograph, a teenage James on stage at Carnegie Hall, taking a bow after his debut recital. The reviewer from the New York Times had called him a once-in-a-generation talent. That night, 3 prestigious conservatories had offered him scholarships. Then came Juilliard, years of intense training. International competitions, growing recognition. Music had been his entire life, his identity, his future, until it wasn't. The wrist injury had seemed minor at first. A slight pain during a particularly demanding practice session. Nothing serious, the first doctor had assured him. Just rest it for a few days, but the pain persisted, worsened. More doctors, more opinions, surgery, physical therapy, months of work to regain full mobility. By the time he could play again without pain, something fundamental had changed. The effortlessness was gone. Where once the music had flowed through him naturally, now each performance required painful concentration. The joy had disappeared, replaced by technical calculation and fear. After one disastrous competition where he'd frozen on stage, unable to finish his piece, James had made his decision. He withdrew from Juilliard, packed away his dreams, and applied to business school. He'd told himself it was practical, mature, that he was moving on. But he had never moved on, not really. He'd just buried that part of himself until last night, when Victor Harrington's challenge had somehow reached through the years and pulled that buried self back to the surface. James put the photograph back in the box. That life was over. But maybe in some strange way it had prepared him for what was coming next. What was it Mr. Wu used to say? Music teaches you everything important about life: discipline, emotion, when to lead and when to follow, how to speak without words, and how to hear what isn't being said. Maybe those were CEO skills after all. James spent Sunday researching Victor Harrington, reading everything he could find about the billionaire's business philosophy and leadership style. The patterns were clear. Victor valued unconventional thinking, hated corporate politics, and had a history of promoting talented outsiders over experienced insiders. By Monday morning, James had made a decision. He would go to this meeting, thank Victor for the opportunity, and respectfully decline. He would explain that while he appreciated the gesture, he wasn't qualified for the position. It was the only reasonable thing to do. He dressed in his best suit, his only suit really, and arrived at Vertex headquarters 30 minutes early. The security guard at the executive entrance checked his ID, then did a double take. "You're James Chen?" the guard asked, unable to hide his surprise. "That's me," James replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Right this way, sir." The guard's tone had changed completely. "Mr. Harrington is expecting you." The executive floor was nothing like the open-plan office where James usually worked. Thick carpets, wood-paneled walls, actual artwork instead of motivational posters. The assistant, Patricia, met him at the elevator. "Mr. Chen, good morning." She smiled professionally, but her eyes held the same curiosity he'd seen in everyone's faces since Saturday night. "Mr. Harrington is finishing another call. Can I get you anything? Coffee, water?" "Water would be great, thank you." She led him to a waiting area outside Victor's office. Through the glass wall, James could see Victor pacing as he talked on the phone, gesturing emphatically. Even from a distance, the billionaire's energy was palpable. "He's been excited about this meeting all morning," Patricia said as she handed James a glass of water. "That's unusual. Mr. Harrington doesn't get excited about many meetings these days." Before James could respond, the door to Victor's office swung open. "James Chen." Victor boomed as if greeting an old friend. Come in, come in." James entered the spacious corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. One wall displayed various awards and recognitions. Another held framed photos of Victor with world leaders, celebrities, and business icons. "Sir, thank you for—" James began. "Victor, please," the older man interrupted, waving him to a seat. "We're going to be working closely together." "No need for formalities about that," James said carefully. "I think there might have been a misunderstanding." Victor's eyebrows rose. "Oh, I'm honored by your offer, truly. But I'm not qualified to be CEO. I work in supply chain analytics. I've never led a division, let alone a company." Victor leaned back in his chair, studying James. "You know what's interesting? In the 24 hours since I announced my intention to make you CEO, not one person has questioned your musical credentials." James blinked, confused by this change of topic. "I've had board members calling me all day," Victor continued. "They've questioned your business experience, your leadership abilities, your knowledge of our industry. But no one has doubted that you can play the piano." He leaned forward. "Why do you think that is?" "Because they heard me play?" "Exactly." Victor slapped his desk for emphasis. "They witnessed excellence with their own eyes and ears. No resume needed, no recommendations, just pure, undeniable talent." His eyes sharpened. "Now tell me about Juilliard." "I was there for 3 years," James said, "on track for a concert career until I injured my wrist. After that, I switched to business school and buried your talent in my supply chain department." There was no accusation in Victor's voice, only curiosity. "I needed a job. Vertex was hiring analysts." Victor nodded slowly. "Last night was the first time you've played publicly since the injury?" "Yes. Yet you played one of the most technically challenging pieces in the piano repertoire, almost flawlessly." Victor's eyes never left James's face. "That speaks to extraordinary discipline, Mr. Chen, and courage." James shook his head. "It doesn't qualify me to run your company." "No?" Victor stood and walked to the window. "Let me tell you something about Vertex Innovations. When I founded this company 30 years ago, we were creating something new, something exciting. We took risks. We broke rules. We zigged when everyone else zagged." He turned back to face James. "Somewhere along the way, we lost that. We became safe, predictable, like every other corporation. And you think I can change that? I think you represent something this company has forgotten, that excellence isn't found in credentials or corner offices. It's found in passion and discipline and the courage to step forward when no one expects you to." Victor sat on the edge of his desk. "Do you know how many of my executives have secret talents they've abandoned? How many dreams they've traded for a bigger paycheck or a fancier title?" James remained silent. "You kept your talent alive," Victor said softly, "even when you thought no one was watching. Even when it brought you no advantage." He smiled. "That's the kind of integrity I want leading Vertex." "The board will fight this," James said. "They'll say you've lost your mind." Victor grinned. "They already are, and they already have. Wei Shang has called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon." His eyes twinkled with mischief. "I was hoping you'd join me for it." James felt a strange calm settle over him. This was madness, of course, but there was something compelling about Victor's vision, this idea that his years of hidden practice, of keeping his musical self alive in private, had actually been preparing him for something more. "What exactly would you expect from me?" James asked finally. Victor's smile widened. "There he is. I was wondering when you'd start asking the right questions." The boardroom fell silent as James entered behind Victor. 12 pairs of eyes tracked their movement, some curious, others openly hostile. The long mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting, making the room feel like a stage. James recognized a few faces from the charity gala, including Wei Zhang, Thomas Reed, and Damon Parker. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor announced cheerfully, "I believe most of you have met James Chen." No one spoke. James felt his collar tighten around his throat. Victor continued undeterred. "As I mentioned Saturday night, Mr. Chen will be transitioning into the CEO role over the next 30 days. Thomas Reed, seated at the far end of the table, cleared his throat. "Victor, with all due respect, this is precisely why we've called this emergency meeting." "I assumed as much," Victor replied, gesturing for James to take the empty chair beside him. "Please proceed with your concerns." Wei Zhang leaned forward, her expression carefully controlled. "Victor, we all appreciate your unconventional approach to business. It's what built Vertex, but this decision goes beyond unconventional. It's reckless." Several board members nodded in agreement. "Mr. Chen," Wei continued, turning to James, "this isn't personal. Your piano performance was impressive, but running a multi-billion-dollar technology company requires specific skills and experience." "Experience Mr. Chen lacks entirely," added Damon Parker. "He has no leadership track record, no strategic vision for the company, no relationships with major clients or investors. He doesn't even have his own assistant," someone muttered down the table. Victor seemed completely unbothered by these objections. He leaned back in his chair, watching the proceedings with mild amusement. "May I speak?" James asked quietly. The room fell silent again, this time with an edge of surprise. They hadn't expected him to have a voice. "Of course," Wei said, her tone suggesting she was humoring him. James took a deep breath. He'd spent the elevator ride up preparing what he would say. Yet now those rehearsed words felt inadequate. Instead, he decided to speak from a more honest place. "You're right," James began. "I don't have executive experience. I've never led a company. Until Saturday night, most of you didn't know I existed." Damon Parker smirked, clearly believing this was James withdrawing from consideration. "But Mr. Harrington sees something valuable in bringing a different perspective to Vertex's leadership. Someone who understands the company from the ground up, not just the top down." A board member James didn't recognize scoffed. "And you believe analyzing supply chain data qualifies you to set our global strategy?" "No," James admitted. "But it gives me insight into operational efficiency that most executives never see. It shows me where our processes break down, where we waste resources, where we could innovate but don't." "That's what department heads are for," Thomas Reed interjected. "CEOs need broader vision," James nodded. "True, and I won't pretend I have all the skills needed yet. But I have something perhaps more important, the humility to recognize what I don't know and the willingness to learn." Wei Zhang raised an eyebrow. "Learning on the job is a luxury Vertex cannot afford. Our shareholders expect stable, experienced leadership." "Our shareholders," Victor finally spoke, "expect growth and innovation. Two areas where we've stagnated under experienced leadership." He fixed Thomas Reed with a pointed look. Reed's face flushed. "Market conditions." "Excuses," Victor cut him off. "Our competitors face the same conditions, yet 3 of them have outperformed us for 6 consecutive quarters." He turned to the board. "We've become risk-averse, cautious, boring. Exactly what I founded Vertex not to be." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. "Victor," Wei said carefully, "even if we accept your assessment, there are dozens of qualified executives, both internal and external, who could bring fresh perspectives without the extreme risk Mr. Chen represents." "Qualified executives," Victor repeated, his tone making the phrase sound like an insult. "People who think exactly like every other qualified executive in the industry." He leaned forward. "Tell me, Wei, when was the last time any of you did something truly unexpected? Something that wasn't calculated to advance your career or protect your position?" The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mr. Chen stepped forward when no one expected him to. Victor continued. He revealed extraordinary talent that he had cultivated not for advancement or recognition, but for its own sake. For excellence itself. He looked around the table. That's the spirit Vertex was founded on. It's still an enormous gamble, said an older board member at the far end. Yes, Victor agreed readily. It is, but calculated gambles are what built this company. Playing it safe is what's holding us back. Wei Jiang studied James with new intensity. What makes you think you can succeed in this role, Mr. Chen? Beyond Mr. Harrington's faith in you, it was a fair question. James thought about his years at Juilliard, about what it took to master a piece like Fantasy Impromptu, about the thousands of hours practicing alone. When I was training as a pianist, James began, I learned that technical skill is only the foundation. What separates good musicians from great ones is their ability to communicate emotion, to tell a story, to connect with an audience. He looked around the table. Business isn't so different. Products and services are just the foundation. What makes a company extraordinary is its ability to connect with people. Customers, employees, partners. Pretty words, Damon Parker said dismissively. But this isn't a concert hall. No, James agreed. It's more important than that. At Vertex, we build technology that shapes how people live and work. That requires more than just technical expertise. It requires understanding human needs, human aspirations. He leaned forward. That's what I would bring to this role. A different way of seeing our purpose. Something shifted in the room. A few board members who had been openly hostile now looked thoughtful. Others remained unconvinced, but their objections seemed less certain. Wei Jiang tapped her pen against her notepad. Even if, and this is a big if, we were to consider this arrangement, there would need to be conditions. Oversight. Training. Victor smiled. Of course. I'm not suggesting we throw Mr. Chen into the deep end without support. What exactly are you suggesting? Thomas Reed asked, his tone suggesting he was humoring a child. A 90-day transition, Victor replied promptly. Mr. Chen works alongside Thomas, learning the role while bringing his fresh perspective. The board receives weekly progress reports. After 90 days, you vote on whether to make the appointment permanent. Wei raised an eyebrow. And if we vote no, then I'll accept your decision, Victor said simply. The board members exchanged surprised glances. Victor Harrington was not known for compromising. You would truly abide by our vote? We pressed. Yes, Victor confirmed. Because I'm confident that in 90 days you'll see what I see in Mr. Chen. And what's that exactly? Thomas Reed asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. Victor turned to James with a small smile. Someone who understands that excellence isn't just what you do, but why you do it. He addressed the board again. Shall we put it to a vote? 90-day transition period with board oversight and a final vote on permanent appointment. Wei Jiang looked around the table, reading the room. Those in favor? Hands rose slowly. Not everyone, but enough. Wei nodded. Motion carries. Mr. Chen will begin transition training effective immediately. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out, some stopping to introduce themselves to James properly. Their handshakes were firmer now, their eye contact more genuine, not full acceptance but the beginning of possibility. Thomas Reed lingered, waiting until the room had emptied before approaching James. Congratulations, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Victor has always had a flair for the dramatic. Mr. Reed, James said carefully, I want you to know I didn't seek this out. It wasn't my intention to take my job. Reed finished for him. No, I'm sure it wasn't. But intentions matter less than outcomes in this business. He straightened his already perfect tie. Victor may believe in fairy tales about hidden talent, but I've been in this industry for 27 years. This company runs on relationships, strategic planning, and hard business decisions that won't be found in a piano score. I understand, James said. That's why I hope to learn from your experience during the transition. Reed's laugh held no humor. Of course you do. Well, lesson 1, watch your back. Vertex's executive floor eats amateurs alive. He checked his watch. My assistant will contact yours to arrange our first mentoring session. As Reed walked away, Victor appeared at James's side. Well, that went better than expected. Did it? James asked uncertainly. Absolutely. Half the board is intrigued rather than just opposed. Wei Zhang is on the fence rather than against us, and Thomas is feeling threatened enough to show his true colors early. Victor clapped James on the shoulder. Perfect. James felt a wave of doubt. Victor, I'm not sure I'm cut out for these kinds of politics. That's not who I am. No, it isn't, Victor agreed. And that's precisely why Vertex needs you. Do you know what kills great companies, James? Not competition, not market shifts. It's when they start caring more about internal power games than about creating something meaningful. As they walked toward the elevator, Victor added, Remember what made you step up to that piano on Saturday night? It wasn't ambition. It wasn't calculation. It was something purer. The chance to create excellence where none was expected. He pressed the button for the executive floor. Bring that same spirit to this role, and you'll transform Vertex in ways that Thomas Reeds of the world never could. The elevator doors closed, carrying them upward toward an uncertain future that somehow, against all logic, James was beginning to believe in. 3 months passed in a blur of meetings, presentations, and late nights. James had never worked so hard in his life, not even during his most intense days at Juilliard. The learning curve wasn't just steep. It was nearly vertical. Financial reports, product roadmaps, investor relations, personnel decisions. Each day brought new challenges that tested his capabilities and resolve. Thomas Reed had kept his promise to mentor James. Though his guidance often felt more like sabotage, critical information would arrive at the last minute. Important clients would suddenly reschedule. Mistakes in presentations would mysteriously appear between review and delivery. Just business, Thomas would say with his practiced smile whenever James confronted him. But for every obstacle Thomas created, James found unexpected allies. Lily from marketing became his unofficial advisor, helping him navigate corporate politics. Several department heads, tired of the old regime's bureaucracy, welcomed James's fresh perspective. Even Wei Zhang, the skeptical CFO, had begun to warm to him after he spotted a financial inefficiency that had been draining millions from the company for years. How did you find this? Wei had asked, genuinely impressed. I used to analyze patterns in supply chain data, James explained. The same principles apply to financial flows. Most surprisingly, several board members who had initially opposed his appointment now regularly sought his input. His outsider perspective, rather than being a liability, had become his greatest asset. Today marked exactly 90 days since that first board meeting. In a few hours, the board would vote on whether to make James's appointment permanent. The thought made his stomach tighten with anxiety. James stood at the window of his temporary office, Thomas's old office, though Thomas had relocated to a slightly smaller one down the hall, a daily reminder of his diminished status. From this height, the city looked peaceful, orderly, so different from the chaos James often felt inside. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He turned to find Victor standing there, looking more relaxed than James had seen him in weeks. Big day, Victor said, entering without waiting for an invitation. That was Victor. Boundaries were merely suggestions. Yes, James agreed. The board votes at 3. Victor studied him. Nervous? Terrified, James admitted. I still feel like I don't belong here. Good. Victor smiled at James's confused expression. The moment you stop feeling that way is when you'll become like all the rest. Complacent, defensive, more concerned with protecting your position than pushing boundaries. James shook his head. It's more than that. These past 90 days, I've been playing catch-up, learning the business, the industry, the players. But if the board makes this permanent, he trailed off. Then you'll have to lead. Victor finished for him. Not just manage, but actually take Vertex somewhere new. Exactly. And I'm not sure I have that vision yet. Victor walked to the window, standing beside James to look out at the city. When you were at Juilliard, studying piano, did you ever learn a piece that seemed impossible at first? Something that stretched you beyond what you thought you could do? James smiled slightly. All the time. That's how you grow as a musician, by constantly pushing against your limitations. And how did you approach those impossible pieces? One measure at a time, James said, remembering. Breaking them down into manageable parts. Working on the hardest sections first. Building muscle memory through repetition. Victor nodded. Leadership works the same way. You don't need the entire vision today. You just need to identify the first measure, the first challenging section, and begin there. Before James could respond, His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant, a new addition he was still getting used to. The quarterly sales reports just came in. They're not good. Victor raised an eyebrow. How not good? Third consecutive quarter of declining revenue. The board presentation is in 2 hours. Convenient timing, Victor remarked. Thomas's parting gift, I suspect. James felt a flash of anger. He knew these numbers were coming and didn't warn me. Of course. He's hoping the board will panic and vote against you. Victor seemed more amused than concerned. What will you do? It was a test, James realized. Not from Thomas, but from Victor. How would he handle this crisis on the day of his fate-deciding vote? I need to see the complete data, James said, already moving toward his desk. Not just the top-line numbers. For the next hour, James immersed himself in sales figures, market analysis, and product performance metrics. The problem became clear. Vertex's flagship products, the ones Thomas had championed, were losing market share to more innovative competitors. Meanwhile, several promising projects had been sidelined for lacking market readiness. One project in particular caught James's attention. It had been developed by a small team in the R&D department, using a fraction of the budget given to mainstream products. Yet its preliminary test results showed remarkable potential. Why was this shelved? James asked the head of R&D over the phone. Thomas thought it was too experimental, too different from our established product lines, came the reply. He said it would confuse our brand identity. By the time the board meeting began, James had completely rewritten his presentation. As he entered the boardroom, he could feel the tension. The poor sales figures had already circulated. Thomas sat at the far end of the table, unable to hide his satisfaction. Wei Jiang opened the meeting. Before we vote on Mr. Chen's permanent appointment, he will present the quarterly results and his assessment of the company's direction. All eyes turned to James. This was it, the moment that would determine his future at Vertex. Thank you. Wei, James began. I'll start with the difficult news. Our sales are down 12% compared to last quarter, and 18% year-over-year. Murmurs spread around the table. Thomas's smile widened slightly. However, James continued, these numbers tell only part of the story. When we break down performance by product line and division, a clearer picture emerges. He displayed a graph showing how Vertex's older, established products were declining while competitors introduced more innovative alternatives. We're not losing market share because our execution is poor, James explained. We're losing because we've stopped innovating where it matters. For the next 20 minutes, James walked the board through his analysis, showing how Vertex had gradually shifted from leading-edge innovation to safer incremental improvements. He highlighted the shelved R&D projects that could potentially reverse this trend, particularly the one that had caught his attention. This technology could redefine our entire industry, James said, his voice growing passionate. Yet it was shelved because it didn't fit our established pattern. Thomas cleared his throat. That project lacks market testing. It's a massive risk. Yes, it is, James agreed. Just like Vertex itself was a massive risk when Victor founded it 30 years ago. He turned to face the board directly. I won't pretend to have all the answers. But I do know this. Vertex wasn't built by playing it safe. It was built by recognizing potential where others saw only risk. James could feel the mood in the room shifting. Even those who had been skeptical were listening intently now. If you vote to make my appointment permanent today, I will immediately greenlight this project and 4 others with similar potential. I'll restructure our R&D funding to prioritize breakthrough innovation over incremental improvement. And I'll implement a company-wide initiative to identify and develop hidden talent in our ranks. People who, like me 3 months ago, might have extraordinary contributions to make if given the chance. He paused, looking around the table. Or you can vote against me, and Vertex can continue its comfortable decline into mediocrity. The choice is yours. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, Wei Jiang spoke. That's quite a proposal, Mr. Chen, bold certainly. She glanced at Victor. I see where you get your flair for the dramatic. Victor raised his hands innocently. This is all James. I haven't seen this presentation before. It's true, James confirmed. Victor has been hands-off throughout this process. These observations, these recommendations, they're mine alone. Wei studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. Then I believe we're ready to vote. She looked around the table. All in favor of confirming James Chen as permanent CEO of Vertex Innovations? Hands rose around the table. Not all at once and not everyone, but enough. More than enough. Motion carries, Wei announced. Congratulations, Mr. Chen. It seems you've composed quite the opening movement for your tenure as CEO. As the meeting adjourned, board members approached to congratulate him. Even Thomas managed a stiff handshake, though he left quickly afterward. Victor was the last to approach, his expression unreadable. Well done, he said simply. Thank you, James replied. For everything. For giving me this chance when no one else would have. Victor shook his head. I didn't give you anything. I just recognized what was already there. He smiled, like a good piano teacher. Speaking of which, James said, I've been thinking about that piano from the charity gala. Oh? I'd like to move it to the building lobby. Install it permanently. Make it available for anyone to play. Victor raised an eyebrow. Planning to hold auditions for your successor already? James laughed. Not exactly. But I think Vertex has more hidden talent waiting to be discovered. People just need the invitation to step forward. As they walked out together, Victor asked, Do you still play? Outside of charity galas, I mean. I've started again, James admitted. Just for myself. Just for the joy of it, Victor nodded, satisfied. That's the most important thing, you know. Not the title, not the office. Finding joy in the work itself. He clapped James on the shoulder. That's when you create something truly extraordinary. 6 months later, Vertex unveiled its breakthrough product to the market. Analysts who had written off the company as past its prime were forced to reconsider. The stock price doubled, then tripled. And in the lobby of Vertex headquarters, beside the sleek reception desk and modern art installations, stood a grand piano. A small plaque beside it read simply, Play something extraordinary. Sometimes late at night when the building was nearly empty, employees would hear music drifting through the atrium. Their CEO still finding his way measure by measure, rehearsing for whatever came next.